Hello, and welcome to Stories of the Journey Home. I'm Leo Sofa, and I'm here to tell you another story. The Elixir of Love, that's the title here. But the story came to me when I posed a couple of questions. And the questions were to do with presence and being really present to life. And the question of, in what areas is it hard to be present to life? In what areas do I find it difficult to stay present? So that's a question for you. It's a question for everybody, really. In what areas of your life, for example, in yourself, are you able to be present fully to yourself? When is it hard to be fully present there? What about in your circle of friends or in your close family? Where is it hard to be really present there? What about in your world? What about in the wider world and all the things that go on in the world? Which are the things that are hard to be present to? So these are some of the questions that I was asking myself before asking for a story. I'm an intuitive storyteller, so all the stories that I tell, they come out of these kind of deep questions, these personal questions, or you could say these meaningful and important questions that we all need to be asking. So the story that came to me in response came like all the stories that I tell. It came in a stream of words and images that told me a story that I simply followed along to. And I liked it enough to want to retell it to you. So here we go. I hope you enjoy. And I'll start us off with a little bit of music. Once upon a time, there was a king, and the king had all the riches that money could buy. He could sit beside his tinkling fountains which would give the most wonderful sound of peace and tranquility. Or he could recline upon cushions so soft and so silky that you might feel that you were lying upon the bosom of a wonderful woman, or upon the cheek of a baby's bottom, or something that soft. Or he would sit upon his balcony and he would look out at a vista, a grand and wonderful vista that you would just be in awe of, you would marvel at. You could look from one horizon to the other and see nothing but beauty. And yet the king was discontent. He was hugely discontent. The more luxury and the more riches that he had, the more his discontent grew. Until one morning, he woke up and he heard a sound coming from his city that immediately bewitched him. This was the sound of somebody, a man, laughing and laughing and laughing for joy. Not just joy, but a bubbling ecstasy, like a happiness that was too large for his own body, too big for his vocal cords to convey. Laughing and laughing such that the king, without really realizing what he was doing, he'd got up and he was going downstairs and he was pulling on his boots and he was walking out of his palace, walking into his city, something he didn't always do. Certainly not alone, certainly not without guards, but here he was, really not having thought very hard about what he was actually doing, walking into the city and following that sound. He carried on walking, and it seemed to be coming from the business district. He thought, aha, this is a man who's made a great deal of money. He's so happy, he's beyond happy because of all the money he's now got. He's probably richer than me. But he carried on walking, and he carried on walking, and eventually he realized that he'd actually walked all the way through the business district, and the sound was still straight ahead of him. He said to himself, yes, of course, I know those stock market traders. They make a killing one day and then they're fearful of losing it the next. No, that couldn't have been one of those. And so he carries on walking. He carries on walking, always following the sound. And now it seems to be coming from the residential area, indeed the very well-to-do residential area. He says, aha, I know where this is coming from. It's a young man who's just met the love of his life. They have just spent a beautiful evening together, and now he wakes up in the morning aware that his life is now complete. His dreams are now going to come true. But he walked a little further, and he walked a little further, and he found that he'd actually walked beyond the residential area, the nice part of town, and the sound was still straight ahead. He thought, yeah, what a fool I've been. I mean, I should know enough about love that it's never so simple. That poor guy was probably consumed with jealousy the day after meeting the love of his life. And anyway, the sound was not there. It was still ahead of him. And still he carried on walking, and still he carried on walking. And now, much to his consternation, much to his dismay, the sound is coming from the seedier part of town, from the place that he almost never goes, the place he would never go in procession or would never even meet anybody, sort of place he avoids, the poorer side of town. And there, it would seem, there is where the sound's coming from. And this baffles him very much. And he gets to this market square, which is really, really squalid. There's hardly anything set up for the day there. And he gets there and he just looks. And right there in the corner, he sees this guy. And this guy is just laughing and laughing. And he's wearing rags. And he's an old beggar. And he's laughing and laughing and laughing. And the king slows his pace now, like he's not even sure if he wants to see this. He's not even sure if he wants to find out what it is. And he walks until he's right there, right up close with the beggar. He says, why are you laughing? And the beggar looks up and looks straight in the king's eyes. He says, why wouldn't I laugh? I've found my way to a treasure greater than any treasure in this world, finer than tinkling fountains, finer than silk cushions, finer than vistas to die for. The king's thinking, is he a mind reader? How does he know this about me? I have found my way to the elixir of love, says the beggar. And as soon as the king hears this, the elixir of love, he knows he has to find his way there. He says feverishly, tell me, where is the elixir of love? I have to know. I have to find this out. The beggar man says, come with me. And he leads the king. He leads the king out of the city. And he leads him into the forest. And he leads him right into the forest to a deep, dark, beautiful spot. And the king has hardly ever been out of his city on his own. He's never been unaccompanied almost anywhere. And here he is in the beautiful forest, and he feels like he's discovering it for the first time. Finally, they settle down in a glade, a beautiful glade where there's a river that flows more beautifully than the finest tinkling fountain. Sit there, says the beggar. And the king, he finds a spot to sit that's surprisingly soft, where the moss is growing thickly upon the rocks. Now, says the beggar, listen. And if you're lucky, my story shall impart to you the very thing you're looking for. And the king, he just sat back and he looked about him at all the beauty that he could see there. And he waited. He waited for the beggar man to start his story. Once, said the beggar, seeking wisdom, I went down into hell. I went down into hell itself, and there I saw fires. I saw pain. I felt heat, and I found one demon. And this one demon, I could see that he was for me because he was hanging at the edges, because he wasn't quite sure. And I said, "Hey!" And he turned around, and as soon as he saw me, one of his scales, it just shook and fell to the ground. Because he was covered in scales. That's the only way a person can survive in hell. That's how a person becomes a demon. They're covered in scales after a time, because that's the only way to protect yourself from the heat. I said, "Would you like to hear a story?" And as soon as I said the word story, why, he howled in pain. He howled in pain as if this was the worst thing, but also the best thing. And I knew then that I had an audience. And I started to tell him stories. I started to tell him the kind of stories that demons cannot bear to hear. Demons cannot bear to hear stories about love, about kindness, about goodness, about everything that's good in a human heart. And he would howl in pain. And then he would draw yet closer. He would try and pull away, but my words with their magnetic power would draw him back in. And every time I finished one of my stories, why, the demon, a whole clutch of scales would just fall off him. And then I'd tell him another. And at the end of that story, another clutch of scales would just fall off him. And another. And another. And all the time, he's howling in pain and trying to get away and being drawn back by the power of my storytelling. Until by the end, why? He's just virtually naked. There's just a few scales left. And as I tell him the very last stories, why, he's just flicking them off his body, these scales, just flicking them off his body, he is. Until he's all completely naked. He's just a naked demon, unprotected from the fires of hell. He says, "What am I supposed to do now? Look what you've done to me." I said, "Come with me." And we went up. We went up to the land where you and I live. And I said, "There's some things I want to show you." And so we walked together a long way until at last we came to a house. And there was a woman who had just lost her baby. She had just lost her baby, and it wasn't the first one. She'd lost 3 before. And by some magic, we were able to stand at the sides inside that house and be unobserved. And we could witness everything. And what we saw there would break any person's heart. Such grief, such horror. Finally, we were walking away, just the two of us, me and the demon. And then he started to sob. He sobbed and he sobbed, and his whole body shook, and he sobbed and he sobbed and he sobbed. And then he said, "I feel better now." And then we walked on and we walked on. And we came finally to a house, another house, where there was inside a scene of almost equal horror. There was a man beating his son. And by the same magic, we could stand inside the walls of that house and observe everything without ourselves being seen. And we cried, the two of us, we cried for the son. But we also cried for the father, for what he must have inside of him that would drive him to do such a thing. And we sobbed and we sobbed. And even as we left and were walking away, we were still sobbing, the two of us. And after a while, the demon, he just finally stopped. And he said, I feel a little better now. And then we walked on. We walked on further. And we came at last to a table. And sitting at the table, there was a man. And this man was eating and eating, and laid upon the table were all manner of foods. There was all kinds of different foods, and all of them very fine and very luxurious and expensive. And he was shoveling this food into his mouth like he was a engine driver feeding the fire of his steam engine. And the demon, he just watched in horror. And then after a time, he said, excuse me, what are you doing? Oh, said the man, looking up from his feeding frenzy. He said, there was something. I tasted it long ago. It was the most wonderful thing in the world. I know I have to find it again. So I bought all the best food, and I'm looking for it meticulously. And I haven't seemed to have found it just yet, but if I keep on trying, I'm sure I will. And the demon and I, we looked at each other and we walked away. And the demon started to laugh and laugh and laugh. And he laughed so much it was as if he couldn't control himself. Until finally he said, I feel a little better now. And so on we walked. On we walked and on we walked until we came to a house. And in this house there was a woman, and she was right up on the top floor. And that was the only place she could be, because you could see all the way up in all the windows of this house. There was no space else to be. The whole place was completely filled with parcels, completely filled with shopping bags that she'd gone shopping with and then simply abandoned. And the demon, he stared up at this. He said, hey, why are you up there? Why is your house so full of things? She said, there was one thing one time that made me happy, but I can't remember what it was. I was out shopping somewhere, and if only I could find it again, then I'd be happy. And the demon, he scratched his head. And as we turned away to leave, he started to laugh, but it was a bitter, a kind of familiar kind of laugh, as if he recognized something. And he laughed and he laughed and he laughed. And then he cried and he cried and he cried. And then finally he said, I feel better now. And so on we walked and on we walked. And we saw many different places. We went to so many different places and we saw many different people. And everything that we saw, why, the demon would laugh or cry. And it seemed as if he was becoming more and more transparent. That even the tiniest thing would touch him. Even the tiniest thing would set him off crying or laughing or swooning. Until I turned around one time and I noticed that he was becoming thinner. I don't mean thin in terms of his belly or his build, but rather like air is thin. He became like a wisp or a shadow. He became so soft. And when now he laughed or cried or said, I feel better now, why, it was like some distant tinkling bell. It was like someone who's not even really there. Until one time I turned around and he was just gone. Just gone like a puff of air or a shower of petals, just gone. And so now I was walking on my own. And my feet, they led me through a dark forest. And eventually I found my way to a palace, a marvelous palace that was breathtakingly beautiful. And the guards greeted me at the gates and they said, how did you get here? Only people who have befriended their demons can find their way here. I said, well, that must be me then. And I was ushered in and I was treated like an honored guest. All the servants came down and attended to me and asked me if there was anything I wanted. And when the lady of the house, the princess, came down, she looked at me and she said, you are very welcome here. You must have befriended your demons to find your way to this place. I said, what's so special about it here? She said, didn't you know? Here we are distilling the elixir of love. And as soon as I heard that, as soon as I heard the elixir of love, I knew that that was my destiny. I knew that if there was only one thing I found in all my life, that had to be the thing. I said, what can I do to get some of the elixir of love? What do I need to do? She said, not so fast. Come and sit here by this fountain. Come on, let us talk a little while to the sound of the tinkling water. And I sat with her, and it was lovely. It was indeed the finest and loveliest sound there ever was. But after a while, I remembered the elixir of love. I pulled on her sleeve. I said, weren't you going to give me the elixir of love? She said, not so fast. Come and sit with me on my balcony. And she led me to a balcony that was so beautiful. You could see from one horizon to the other an unending view of beauty. It was indeed breathtaking, and for a while I forgot why I was even there. But then I remembered. I said, wait, weren't you going to give me the elixir of love? What about that? She said, not so fast. Come and recline with me on these cushions, these silken cushions, and just lie with me. And so I did. And they were so soft. They were so lovely. I almost forgot everything else as I lay there. But after a while, it was like I had to shake myself too. I said, wait, weren't you going to give me the elixir of love? She said, you're always in such a hurry. Come to bed with me. Well, that was wonderful. I have to admit that was one of the most wonderful things I ever knew. But even after that, I shook myself and I remembered and I said, what about the elixir of love? Weren't you going to give that to me? And then she suddenly became angry. Her skin all turned green. The whole palace seemed to fill with smoke and darkness. And she said, no. Now she was like a screaming witch. No, you will never get the elixir of love because you are not worthy. But now my passion was inflamed. I wouldn't take that for an answer, and I shouted back at her, I am worthy. I am worthy. And then she grew in size and became a huge dragon, and the whole palace became like the stuff of nightmares. And she poured down fire upon me and said, you are not worthy. But my passions were inflamed now, and I wouldn't give up. And I screamed even louder. I said, I am worthy. She seemed to like my answer. Because all at once she became a princess again. And the palace turned from being a nightmare back into a very pleasant place. She said, very well then, you have earned the elixir of love. And then she gave it to me. She gave it to me, one taste of it, and everything was different. One taste of it and everything was transformed. And I knew then what the woman with all the parcels was looking for. I knew then what the man with all the food was looking for. I even knew then what the father, what the son, what the mother had all been yearning for. The elixir of love. The beggar came to the end of his story. The king was in despair. It was like each scene of that story had described part of his life. It was like every word was a string of beads around his neck that simply said truth, and this truth is yours. He said, by what means can I find this thing? Can you give it to me? And the beggar man, he said, I can teach you, but it might take a while. However long it takes, says the king, I am your pupil. And so the beggar taught him. He taught him, and it didn't take a long time, not even days, not even weeks, not months, but many years. But by the time he had finished, the king was able to find and experience the stillness that underlies every moment. He was able to apprehend and feel and discover the blessing that exists in everything by just being here, by only and only being right here, attentive to whatever is occurring. Until the king became like an elixir of love himself, until the king became like a bottle of the elixir of love. And he could travel anywhere in his kingdom. And anyone that he met, he would sit and he would witness and he would be fully present, such that just by his presence and just by his witnessing, any person that sat with him would feel and know the elixir of love too. And he went everywhere. He traveled from one house to the next, all over his kingdom, until every single house he'd visited. And with every single one of his subjects, he had sat in full presence, such that whoever he had been with would feel and know the elixir of love. And I was there too. I found my way to that kingdom just looking for my next story, and I saw how happy everybody was. I said, what kind of a ruler do you have here? A tyrant? A dictator? Because that's all I've seen in all the places I've visited recently. They said, no tyrant, no dictator. We have a king, a true king. What's your trade, sir? They asked me. Oh, me, I'm just a storyteller. They said, the king will be delighted to meet you. I said, really? Does he have a storyteller? They said, come on. I was treated like an honored guest. I was invited up to the king's throne room. And the king, when he saw what a sorry state I was, when he saw how empty of stories that I'd become, how actually I had been searching for months and months and not a single story had I found in all of those kingdoms that I'd been traveling through, he said, storyteller, I have a story for you. And the story he told me was the story I told you. Okay, so there's the story. I hope that was good to listen to. I hope that shone a light in some ways on the questions I asked at the beginning of where can you be most present and where is it hardest to be present in your world, in your life, in yourself. So if you want to find out more about intuitive storytelling, you can go to Stories of the Journey Home, my website, where I offer trainings and other services based on this subtle art. I'll be telling stories regularly here, so be sure to subscribe. And it's always nice to know how stories landed for people and how they found them. So do leave a comment in the chat or in the comment box if you're watching after the event, or you can email me via my website. Okay, thanks very much for being here. Bye for now.